Hello everybody! So we are back to having the worst lighting ever. Sorry about that. To all you meat eaters watching, maybe you do believe that veganism is a cult. I promise that I will not insult you in this video. But I've gotta say, I cannot believe that this is an issue of contention. Back in the day, the cult argument was not so popular, but nowadays I hear it all the time. For example, the header of the subreddit r/anti-vegan is against the cult of veganism. In my opinion, this is mostly just because veganism has been a massively increasing in popularity, and because it's a growing philosophy, it must be a cult, right? Well, I have 7 things to talk about here. They are, first, idol worship, second, the actual beliefs of vegans, third, religious veganism, 4, occult rituals, 5, brainwashing, 6, nature, and 7, the existence of Exvegans. So, first is idol worship, and this is kind of a joke because veganism actually does not have any idols. There are figures in the vegan movement that we follow, just like there are figures in any other social movement. And my favorite is Joey Carbstrong. By the way, I don't worship him. We might have heroes, but they aren't our gods, and we wouldn't jump off a bridge or drink the Kool-Aid just because they tell us to. And you need to understand this. Idol worship of a person or an object, or at least having a cult leader, is kind of a defining feature of cults. So already veganism is not a cult, unless you unless you count the worship of nutritional yeast, which I do not. But I'm not done yet. Second is the actual views of veganism, and of vegans themselves. So veganism is a moral philosophy. Here's a vegan society definition that you probably hear a lot, and I quote, "A philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals." So, in my opinion, this is basically just an applied anti-animal abuse stance. And next, veganism doesn't require you to do anything, it requires you not to do something. Which is to not support the needless suffering and death of animals. This is different from cults, which usually require that people do something or live their lives in a certain way. You don't need to be part of vegan communities to be vegan. You don't need to know any vegans personally. I personally have met like 4 vegans over the course of my entire life. You also don't need to do any activism or outreach. I mean, we encourage it, of course, but still. So, veganism is the cult of not abusing animals. I'm not really being facetious here. That's literally the argument, that veganism is a cult of not abusing animals. Since when was the idea of not doing something a cult? Especially not doing something that most of the population believes in theory that we should not do. Third is religious veganism. And I just want to say that conforming to an ethical ideology does not make you religious, unless you're going to argue that it does, in which case the label of religious doesn't really have a meaning at all, because all people conform to an ethical philosophy. And most people also conform to the ethical philosophy of not abusing animals, except we're the ones who actually put it into practice and apply it in real life. So, you could say that we practice veganism religiously. If you could argue again that you could even not do something religiously, doing something religiously meaning doing it with consistent and conscientious regularity, which is kind of weird, but okay. I, for example, religiously abstain from beating women. Does that make me a part of the not beating women cult? Next up is occult rituals, and I want to be totally transparent with you. Here's a list of all of the occult rituals that we practice in veganism. Fifth is brainwashing, and I have to say, if you think that vegans are brainwashing people, then you have to accept the idea that animal abuse is correct, like animal abuse in theory, because otherwise you would have to agree that we are correctly brainwashing people in the same manner that human rights activists would be brainwashing people to not think that rape is okay, which is like, okay, guilty as charged. And convincing somebody to do something is not brainwashing. There were abolitionists back in the slave times. That's not brainwashing either, I guess. Also, human instincts are on the side of veganism, right? For example, you take a child, you put a knife in its hand, and you're like, hey kid, you hungry? And then you put him, like, this is a really, like, weird hypothetical, but let's say you put them in a backyard. Next to them is, like, a dog, or, I don't know, like, even a pig or a chicken or something. And then next to that is a grape, is like some grapes, or an apple tree. Sorry, this is I'm not doing very well on this hypothetical, but try and stick with me. So, kid with knife, apple tree, even avocado tree, and then cat or dog and pig. You think the hungry kid is gonna be like, "Ooh boy, let me go and chop up those animals and eat them"? No, they would go for the plant foods, and that's because it's in our nature to want to eat plants and not animals. Even, like, a good marker of psychopathy in children is if we abuse animals. And a personal anecdote, I think when I was young, my parents took me fishing, and like, they dragged the fish out of the ocean or the lake or whatever, and put it in a bucket, and there was, like, blood, and it was genuinely, like, a traumatizing experience for me, even back then, because I was just so in tune naturally with the idea that animal abuse and cruelty is wrong. So you can't really brainwash somebody into a natural instinct, especially a correct and empathetic natural instinct. And I mean, hey, if you're arguing that you can, then guilty as charged again. The cult of introducing people to their natural instincts. And also, this is ironic just because of the amount of lobbying done by the animal products industries, as well as the fact that pro-meat propaganda lies about health are being and have been pushed in grade school, as well as the industry-funded pro-meat studies, which are published all the time, and the gigantic animal products advertising conglomerate. Sixth is nature, and to be honest, I basically covered the whole thing in my brainwashing part. But I just wanted to say some, like, extra things here. The fact that something is done in nature, or the fact that something comes naturally to humans, even accepting that abusing animals comes naturally to humans, which I do not, of course, that's not a good argument. A lot of things come naturally. You could say that rape is natural, it happens in nature. Murder of each other is natural, it happens in nature. Nature, though, is not a good argument. It's like one of the most common informal logical fallacies. And the idea of morals itself is to kind of direct people away from their negative natural inclinations, their negative immoral natural inclinations. That's one of the jobs of morals. I'm basically oversimplifying it, but if you're calling veganism a cult because it does that, then again, you have to be calling all moral systems a cult, which is completely absurd. And finally, the existence of ex-vegans. So, the existence of ex-vegans does not prove that veganism is a cult. One of the reasons for that is that practically all vegans are ex-meat eaters. So, is eating meat a cult? Honestly, it's closer to being one than veganism because of the reasons that I talked about. And there's also the idea that vegans jump on ex-vegans and attack them. Therefore, veganism must be a cult. So first of all, I don't agree with the idea that just because vegans talk about and quote-unquote attack ex-vegans means that veganism is a cult. It's kind of a pretty big leap in logic. But the reasons that vegans do this are twofold. One is to help out the person, assuming that they are being honest in their concerns, and we're assuming that the person wants to be a vegan but can't due to some definitely fixable health issue. Second is because we excuse meat eaters morally because they're not fully aware of what they're supporting, and they at least have a disconnect due to social conditioning, and ex-vegans in general do not, because in the process of being vegan, you by and large break some of that social conditioning and disconnect, cognitive dissonance. So ex-vegans, at least in our view, are consciously supporting animal abuse and murder. Finally, the fact that people quit something does not make it a cult. People quit exercise, people quit abstaining from smoking and alcohol, people relapse on drug use. You might notice a lot of these things are willpower-based. A largely cited reason as to why ex-vegans stopped being vegan is because they did not like social ostracization. And also the fact of ostracization is another reason as to why carnism is more cult-like than veganism. But just because it's closer to being a cult doesn't mean that it is, because they don't have idols, rituals, or a cult leader anyway. And finally, people change moral beliefs all the time. By this standard, every single moral belief which someone has changed at some point is a cult, which is completely and fully ridiculous. So, in conclusion, people usually call veganism a cult out of just an emotional reaction. But just in case they're thinking about it logically, those were 7 reasons as to why someone might call veganism or something a cult, and why they don't apply to veganism, and why they don't prove that veganism is a cult. So, hey, come on into the cult, guys, right? Be vegan. Bow before me, the god of veganism. Eat your tofu. Animal abuse is wrong. Okay, that one's actually true. Be vegan.